The rain had been an unwelcome companion for the last 50 miles, a relentless drumming on the aging pickup's roof, mirroring the anxious rhythm in Mark's chest. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, eyes scanning the roadside through the smear of the wipers. 5 years. It felt like a lifetime had passed since he'd last seen Sarah, since the argument that had ripped their world apart. 5 years of silence, of unanswered questions, of a hollow ache in his gut that he'd never quite been able to fill. Then, 3 days ago, a cryptic email from an old friend, barely more than a whisper. Sarah, Sun Haven Trailer Park, near the state line. She's in trouble, Mark. Real trouble. Trouble. Sarah? The woman who painted sunbeams onto canvas, whose laughter was a melody, whose spirit was as wild and free as the ocean. The thought of her in trouble, in a place called Sun Haven Trailer Park, felt like a cruel joke. He tried calling, texting, searching online, but found nothing. It was as if she had vanished from the face of the earth. But the message had the ring of truth, a desperate plea hidden beneath the sparse words. He hadn't hesitated. He'd packed a bag, ignored the protest from his carefully constructed, emotionally sterile life, and driven towards a past he thought was buried, toward a woman he'd never stopped loving, despite the pain. Sun Haven Trailer Park. The sign itself was a monument to neglect, faded paint peeling, one corner broken off. It stood at the end of a long, winding driveway that was more pothole than asphalt. As he turned the truck onto the drive, the rain began to ease, leaving behind a heavy, humid air that clung to everything. The park unfolded before him, a collection of mobile homes in various states of disrepair, scattered haphazardly across a patch of damp, weedy ground. Rust stains streaked the metal siding, windows were boarded up or cracked, and stray cats slinked between overturned plastic bins. Laundry, mostly drab and worn, hung limply on lines strung between sagging poles. A forgotten swing set stood silent and still, a lonely sentinel in the gloom. The air here felt thick, stagnant, laced with the smell of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something metallic and acrid, like old oil and desperation. This was not Sarah. This could not be her. He had pictured her in a small, cozy apartment filled with her art, perhaps struggling, but never this. This was a place where dreams came to die, where hope was a luxury no one could afford. Doubt gnawed at him, a cold, sharp sensation in his gut. Had the friend been mistaken? Was this some terrible misunderstanding? He parked the truck near the entrance, unwilling to drive deeper into the maze of narrow lanes. He got out, the ground soft and muddy beneath his boots. The silence was broken only by the distant hum of traffic on the highway and the occasional drip of water from the trailer roofs. He felt exposed, an outsider in a place that guarded its secrets jealously. He pulled out his phone, looking at the address, 23F. He started walking, his steps measured, his eyes scanning the numbers painted on the trailers, each one a small, lonely unit in this forgotten community. 10A, 11B, 12C. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, anxious drumbeat. He felt a growing sense of dread, a premonition that whatever he was about to find, it wouldn't be easy. He passed a trailer with a porch cluttered with discarded furniture and empty beer cans. Further on, a dog barked incessantly from behind a closed door. The air grew heavier, the silence more oppressive. Then he saw it. Trailer 23F. It was set back from the main path, partially hidden by a scraggly hedge. It was smaller than the others, older, its white paint yellowed and peeling. The steps leading up to the door were made of warped plastic, stained and cracked. A small patch of ground beside the steps held a few struggling marigolds, their orange petals a defiant splash of color against the pervasive gray. Despite the neglect, there was a faint attempt at creating something, a hint of a desire for beauty in this desolate place. This, more than anything, made his heart sink. This small act of defiance, the marigolds, felt like something Sarah would do, a tiny spark of her indomitable spirit refusing to be extinguished. He stood before the steps, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the worn metal door. He hesitated, his knuckles hovering inches from the surface. What would he say? What would she say? 5 years of silence, 5 years of hurt and misunderstanding hung heavy in the air between them and that thin metal door. He took a deep, shaky breath, the scent of damp earth and something vaguely metallic filling his lungs. He was here. There was no turning back. He was about to knock when the door creaked open, slowly, tentatively, and then he saw her. Sarah, but not the Sarah he remembered. Her vibrant red hair, which he loved to run his fingers through, was pulled back in a messy, unkempt bun, strands escaping around her face. Her face was thinner, the sharp angles of her cheekbones more prominent, and there were faint lines etched around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Those eyes, though, those bright, intelligent green eyes were still the same, but they held a weariness, a guardedness, an almost desperate fear that sent a cold shiver down his spine. She wore faded, paint-stained jeans and an old t-shirt, clothes that seemed to hang loosely on her frame. The radiant energy he remembered was dimmed, replaced by a fragile vulnerability that broke his heart. Mark, her voice was a soft, hesitant whisper, as if she wasn't sure if he was real, a ghost from a long-buried past. Sarah, he managed, his own voice rough with emotion, thicker than he expected. It's me. I found you. A bead of silence stretched between them, taut with unspoken history, regret, and a palpable tension. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, surprise, yes, but also a flash of panic, a desperate urge to turn and disappear back into the shadows. She stepped back slightly, putting a little more distance between them, her body language guarded, defensive. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice still soft, but laced with an undeniable coolness, a clear desire for him to be anywhere but here. I got a message, he stammered, fumbling for the right words. From a friend. They said you were here, and that you needed help. She hugged her arms around herself, a small, self-protective gesture. Her gaze darted past him, scanning the entrance of the park, a subtle movement that suggested she was checking for something or someone. She seemed jumpy, on edge, like a cornered animal. I'm fine, Mark. Really, you shouldn't have come. There's nothing here for you. His heart sank further. This wasn't just guardedness. It was a clear dismissal. It hurt more than he expected, a sharp pain on top of the dull ache of the last 5 years. Sarah, please, just let me understand. What happened? Why are you here? As he spoke, a small figure appeared behind her legs, peeking out cautiously. A child. A boy. He looked about 4 or 5 years old, with a shock of sandy brown hair that looked a little too long and wide, curious eyes that took in Mark with hesitant interest. He was clutching a worn, faded teddy bear, its fur matted and one eye missing. Mark's breath caught in his throat. The boy looked up at him, a tentative smile playing on his lips, and in that instant, the world seemed to stop spinning. The curve of the mouth, the slight tilt of the head, the crinkle at the corner of the eyes when he smiled, the shape of his chin, even the way he held his shoulders, it was undeniable. It was his smile, a smaller, innocent, perfect version of his own smile, looking back at him from the face of a child he had never known existed. 5 years. A son. His smile. The air felt thin, difficult to breathe. A million questions, 1,000 accusations, flooded his mind, unspoken, but loud in the sudden, ringing silence between them. He looked from a boy to Sarah, whose face had gone pale, her eyes fixed on him with an expression of apprehension mixed with a deep, profound sadness, a silent plea for understanding that she couldn't voice. Sarah, he whispered, the word heavy with the weight of this sudden, astonishing, unbelievable revelation. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. Who is this? She hesitated for a long moment, her gaze dropping to the floor as if she couldn't bear to meet his eyes. The boy, sensing the sudden, charged tension between the adults, clung tighter to her leg, burying his face in the worn denim of her jeans. Finally, slowly, she looked up, her eyes meeting his. In their depth, he saw a story of struggle, of loss, of a burden carried alone for 5 long years. Mark, she said, her voice barely a whisper, thick with emotion. This is Leo. Leo, a name he had never heard before, a life he had never known existed. His son. He knelt down slowly, deliberately, trying to keep his movements calm, his voice steady. He extended a hand towards the boy, a silent offering of connection. Hey there, Leo, he said, his voice soft. I'm Mark. It's nice to meet you. Leo looked at Sarah, then back at Mark, his eyes wide with a mixture of shyness and curiosity. He didn't reach out, but the tentative smile returned, a hesitant blossom on his small face. It was undeniable. The resemblance was striking, heartbreakingly clear. How had this happened? Why had she kept this from him? The pain of their separation, the confusion and anger he'd carried for years, suddenly felt insignificant, a distant echo compared to the monumental secret she had been living with. Can we talk, Sarah? He asked, standing up slowly, his gaze never leaving Leo's face for long. Properly? Not like this. She seemed to weigh the request, her eyes still wary, still darting glances towards the park entrance. She chewed on her lip for a moment, her shoulders tense. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, she nodded curtly. Come in, she said, opening the door wider. But, just for a minute. I don't want to cause any trouble. He stepped inside the trailer. The air inside was close, smelling faintly of cooking, dust, and something else he couldn't quite place, perhaps stale cigarettes or the lingering scent of damp. It was small, cramped, but remarkably clean despite the obvious wear and tear. Toys were scattered on the floor, well-loved but worn. A small plastic table and chairs were set up in the corner, next to a wall covered with drawings, vibrant, childlike scribbles of suns, houses, and stick figures. It was a space clearly dedicated to a child's life, a small haven carved out of the surrounding dilapidation. Have a seat, she said, gesturing toward a worn sofa covered with a brightly colored, slightly faded throw. She didn't sit, remaining standing by the counter, her arms still wrapped around herself, as if poised for flight. Leo retreated behind her legs again, peeking out with wide, curious eyes, his teddy bear clutched tightly to his chest. Sarah, I don't understand. Mark began, his voice low, struggling to control the mix of emotions swirling within him. Shock, hurt, confusion, but also a strange, burgeoning sense of wonder as he looked at the little boy. Why didn't you tell me? About Leo? About us having a son? She flinched slightly at his directness, at the raw emotion in his voice. It's complicated, Mark. So complicated. Complicated? He couldn't keep the frustration out of his voice, the pain of 5 years of ignorance rising to the surface. He's my son, Sarah. I can see it. He has my smile. I know, she said softly, her gaze finally meeting his, the green eyes filled with a deep, profound sadness. I know he does. I see it every day. Then why? The question was a desperate plea for understanding. Why keep him from me? For 5 years? Didn't I have a right to know? Before she could answer, a loud, insistent banging echoed through the small trailer. Not a knock, a heavy, demanding pounding that made the thin walls rattle. Sarah froze, her eyes darting towards the door, the guarded look intensifying into outright, visceral fear. Her hand went immediately to Leo's head, pushing him gently but firmly behind her, shielding him with her body. Who is that? Mark asked, his senses suddenly on high alert. The atmosphere in the trailer had shifted instantly from strained, emotional reunion to a palpable sense of danger. Stay here, she whispered urgently, her voice tight with panic. She walked quickly to the door, her movements jerky, peering through the small, grimy window before opening it a crack, keeping her body positioned to block the view inside. Mark couldn't see who was outside, but he heard a man's rough, impatient voice. Sarah, you in there? Got something for you. Needs dealing with. Sarah's response was low, almost inaudible, a hurried whisper. Not now, Ray, later. I can't. The man's voice grew louder, laced with menace and impatience. Nah, needs dealing with now, Sarah. Don't waste my time. Open up. There was a frustrated sigh from outside, followed by another heavy thud against the door, a clear threat. Sarah's face was a mask of pure terror. She shook her head slightly, her eyes wide with fear as she looked back at Mark for a split second, a silent plea in their depths. "Please, Ray, not in front of, not right now." Her voice trailed off, her gaze flicking towards Mark, then towards Leo, who was now whimpering softly behind her. There was another bang on the door, harder this time. "Don't be difficult, Sarah," the man, Ray growled. "Just want what's owed. Open the damn door." Sarah's shoulders slumped in defeat. She clearly saw no way out. With a trembling hand, she opened the door wider, revealing a burly man with a thick neck, a scowl etched onto his face, and a faded, amateurish tattoo of a spider on his neck. He wore greasy, ill-fitting work clothes and smelled faintly of stale alcohol and sweat. His eyes, small and beady, were hard and calculating as they swept over Sarah, then landed on Mark, a look of immediate suspicion and hostility crossing his features. "Who the hell are you?" Ray demanded, his voice a gravelly growl. His eyes narrowed, assessing Mark from head to toe. He's just leaving," Sarah said quickly, stepping in front of Mark, trying to shield him, her body tense. "Leaving?" Ray scoffed, a humorless sound. He pushed past Sarah, his bulk filling the doorway, his eyes scanning the small living space, taking in the toys, the drawings, the signs of a life lived here. His gaze landed on Leo, still hiding behind Sarah, and his expression softened slightly, though the underlying menace remained. "Hey there, Squirt." Hiding from old Ray, Leo didn't respond, burying his face deeper in Sarah's leg, whimpering softly. Ray turned his attention back to Mark, his gaze sharp and assessing, clearly sizing him up. "You got business here, pal? Poking around where you don't belong." Mark met his stare, a surge of protective anger overriding his initial shock and fear. He stood taller, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "I'm a friend of Sarah's. I'm here to help her." "A friend, huh?" Ray sneered, a knowing, unpleasant smile spreading across his face. "She don't have many friends out here, especially not friends who look like they just rolled in from the city." His gaze lingered on Mark's clothes, his relatively clean appearance, a clear contrast to the inhabitants of Sun Haven. He took a step closer to Mark, invading his personal space, the smell of alcohol and sweat strong. "You think you can just waltz in here and play the hero?" The implication was clear. Ray saw Mark as an outsider, a threat to his control, or perhaps someone who could interfere with whatever hold he had over Sarah. Mark didn't back down. "I'm here to help her. What's the problem, Ray?" Ray let out a short, harsh laugh, entirely devoid of amusement. "The problem is, Sarah here ain't paid up. Rent's overdue, and I got expenses." He turned back to Sarah, his face hardening again. "Look, Sarah, I ain't got all day to dance around this. Where's the money?" Sarah wrung her hands, her gaze fixed on the floor, her face pale. I don't have it right now, Ray. I told you. I'll have it by Friday. I just need a few more days." "Friday ain't good enough," Ray said, his voice rising, his patience clearly wearing thin. "It was due yesterday. You think I run a damn charity here? I got my own bills to pay. This trailer park ain't free to run." He gestured vaguely around the cramped, living space, his eyes sweeping over their meager possessions. "Rent don't pay itself, and late fees add up." Rent. Sarah owed rent to this man, in this dilapidated trailer park, and he was clearly exploiting her vulnerability, demanding extra payments. Mark's confusion deepened, replaced by a growing sense of outrage and a fierce protectiveness towards Sarah and child. This wasn't just about their past. Sarah was trapped in a desperate situation, being preyed upon. "I'll get it, Ray. I promise," Sarah pleaded, her voice small and trembling, filled with a raw desperation that tore at Mark's heart. "I'm just waiting on some money." "Promises, promises." Ray scoffed, stepping closer to Sarah, his face inches from hers, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl that only they could hear, but Mark could sense the threat in his posture. "Maybe I should just take something instead. Something nice to cover the delay." His eyes landed on a small, framed drawing hanging on the wall above the small table. A child's drawing, vibrant and cheerful despite the grim surroundings, depicting a bright yellow sun, a lopsided house, and several stick figures with enormous smiles. Leo's drawing. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. She instinctively stepped in front of the picture, shielding it with her body. "No, not that, Ray. Please, don't take that." It was a child's drawing, likely worthless to anyone else, but clearly priceless to Sarah and Leo. This was the line. This was where Mark's simmering anger boiled over. He had had enough of this man, of this place, of Sarah's fear. He stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Ray and Sarah, his body a shield. "All right, Ray," he said, his voice firm and steady, surprising himself with his own calmness in the face of the rising tension. "How much does she owe you?" "Exactly." Ray looked surprised by Mark's intervention, his eyes narrowing again, a calculating glint appearing in their depths. He clearly hadn't expected the city boy to stand up to him. "What's it to you, pal? You gonna cover her debts?" "Just tell me the amount," Mark said, keeping his gaze steady, refusing to be intimidated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He had a few $100s in cash, enough to cover this petty demand, enough to get them out of here, at least for now. Ray scratched his chin, his eyes flickering from the money to Mark, then back to Sarah. A slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face, the kind of smile that promised more trouble down the line. "Let's just say $200. To cover the overdue rent, the late fees, and my inconvenience." He named a number that was clearly inflated, an opportunistic grab. $200. It was nothing to Mark, a few dinners out in the city. But for Sarah, here, it was clearly a fortune. He pulled out the cash, counting out $200, his hand trembling slightly. "Here," he said, holding out the money to Ray. "Take it. Now, leave her alone." Ray stared at the money, his eyes widening slightly in genuine surprise. He clearly hadn't expected this. He snatched the cash from Mark's hand, counting it quickly, his lips moving silently. He looked up, his suspicions still lingering, mixed with a greedy satisfaction. "You just paying her debts? Just like that? For a friend?" "Just take the money, Ray," Sarah said, her voice trembling with relief, though her eyes still held a flicker of fear. Ray stuffed the cash into his pocket, patting it down. He still seemed unsure, looking between Mark and Sarah, as if trying to figure out the angle, the catch. "All right, it's paid. For now." He gave Mark one last hard, assessing look. "But don't think this changes anything, pal. She's still my tenant. And you better not be causing any trouble around here. This is my park." With that, he turned and left, his heavy footsteps receding down the path, leaving behind a thick, heavy silence that felt almost louder than his shouting. Sarah visibly sagged with relief as the door closed behind him. Leo rushed out from behind her legs and clung to her, burying his face in her side, his soft whimpers turning into shaky breaths. She stroked his hair, pulling him close, her expression a mixture of profound relief, gratitude, and lingering fear. "Sarah, what was that?" Mark asked, his voice softer now, his initial anger giving way to a deep, aching concern. "Why is he harassing you like that? What's really going on?" She sighed, running a trembling hand through her already messy hair. She finally seemed to relax, the tension draining from her body, leaving her looking utterly exhausted. He's the park manager, Mark. And he's a bully, a cruel, petty bully. He knows I'm in a difficult situation. He takes advantage. He hikes up the rent, finds excuses for extra fees, threatens eviction. He knows I can't afford to fight him. He knows I have nowhere else to go right now. A difficult situation? Mark repeated, the words feeling inadequate, almost insulting, given what he was witnessing. Sarah, you're living in a place like this, being harassed and threatened by your landlord, and you have a son I knew nothing about. That's a bit more than a difficult situation, isn't it? She finally met his gaze again, her green eyes filled with a pain that went deeper than just her current circumstances, a pain that spoke of years of struggle and hardship. I know, Mark. I know. It's a long story. A really long, messy story. He walked over to her, his heart aching for her, for the life she had been forced to live. He knelt down slowly, his gaze fixed on Leo, who was now peeking out from behind Sarah again, his small thumb in his mouth, watching Mark with hesitant curiosity. Mark reached out, gently resting his hand on Leo's small shoulder. The boy flinched slightly, but didn't pull away. "I want to hear it, Sarah," Mark said, his voice gentle but firm, unwavering in his resolve. "All of it. Every single bit. From the beginning." He glanced at Leo, then back at Sarah. "But maybe we should talk somewhere else? Or later? Is there somewhere safe we can go?" She bit her lip, her gaze darting around the small, cramped space, then back towards the door, a lingering fear in her eyes. "Leo, why don't you go play in your room for a bit?" she said, her voice softer now, gentle as she spoke to her son. "Can you do that for Mommy?" Leo looked uncertainly at Mark, then back at Sarah, his small face a mixture of shyness and curiosity. He slowly released his grip on Sarah's leg and, still clutching his worn teddy bear, shuffled toward the small door at the end of the trailer. As he disappeared into the room, Mark heard the faint, comforting sounds of a child's quiet play, the soft murmur of invented voices, the gentle clatter of toys. Sarah turned back to Mark, her shoulders slumping as if a great, invisible weight had been lifted, only to be replaced by the heavy burden of the truth she had to tell. "Okay," she said, her voice low and weary, laced with a deep sadness. "We can talk. But it's not easy, Mark. None of it is easy." They sat on the worn sofa, the silence between them thick with anticipation and the weight of years of separation and unspoken truths. Mark waited, giving her space, watching her as she seemed to gather her thoughts, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the trailer walls, lost in the difficult memories she was about to unearth. After you left," she began, her voice barely a whisper, as if speaking the words aloud made them real in a way they hadn't been before. "That week, the week after our fight, I found out I was pregnant." Mark's heart clenched, a sharp, painful contraction in his chest. He had suspected at the moment he saw Leo's smile, the undeniable resemblance, but hearing the words spoken aloud, confirming his sudden, breathtaking realization, still hit him with the force of a physical blow. "You were pregnant with Leo?" She nodded slowly, not looking at him, her gaze fixed on the faded pattern of the throw on the sofa. "Yes, he's yours, Mark. He's our son." He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a shaky breath, trying to process the magnitude of what she had just confirmed. His son, a little boy he had never known existed, living in this dilapidated trailer park, facing hardship and fear. The joy of this incredible revelation was tangled with the pain of the lost years, the confusion of why he had been kept in the dark. "Why, Sarah?" The question was out before he could stop it, a mix of hurt, bewilderment, and a deep, aching sense of loss for the time he had missed. "Why didn't you tell me? Didn't I have a right to know I was going to be a father? To be there for you? For him?" She flinched slightly again at the raw emotion in his voice. She finally looked at him, her green eyes clouded with a pain he couldn't fully fathom, a pain that spoke of fear and desperation and choices made under impossible circumstances. "I wanted to, Mark. So many times. Believe me, I wanted to. I wrote you letters, I drafted emails, I even stood outside your apartment building once, trying to find the courage to knock." She took a shaky breath, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "But everything was such a mess, Mark. Such a terrible, beautiful mess. We were fighting, you were so angry, so hurt, and I was scared. Scared of how you would react. Scared of making things worse. Scared of doing it alone. Scared of messing up his life before it even began." She paused, the silence filled with the weight of her unspoken regrets. And then things just spiraled. They got worse. Much, much worse. Worse? How, Sarah? What could be worse than facing this alone? She hesitated, her gaze distant, as if reliving the difficult memories. She seemed to be trying to decide how much to tell him, how much of the painful truth she could bear to share. "After you left, I lost my job. The gallery I worked for closed down unexpectedly. I couldn't afford my apartment anymore. I didn't have any family to fall back on. My parents, they weren't exactly supportive of my life choices, as they called them. A flicker of bitterness crossed her face. Things got really bad really fast. I was alone, Mark, and I was pregnant. He listened intently, his heart aching for her, for the struggle she had endured in silence. While he had been navigating his own pain and trying to rebuild his life, she had been facing this, alone and vulnerable. The self-pity he had felt for his own heartache now felt insignificant, almost shameful, compared to the reality of her past 5 years. Sarah, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. How could you? She said, a hint of resignation, rather than accusation, in her voice. You were gone. You had your own life to figure out. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to trap you. The simple, painful truth of that statement hung in the air. He had been gone, out of her life, out of the picture, while she was facing the biggest, most daunting challenge of her life, bringing a child into the world with no support, no safety net. I ended up drifting for a while, she continued, her voice low, her gaze distant, as if watching the past unfold before her eyes. Staying in shelters, women's centers, sometimes just sleeping in my car when I had one. Taking whatever work I could find, cleaning, waitressing, anything that paid cash. It was hard, Mark. Harder than you can imagine, especially being pregnant and then with a newborn. He listened, his hand resting on hers on the sofa, offering a silent anchor in the storm of her memories. He imagined her, alone, pregnant, navigating the harsh realities of homelessness and poverty. The strong, vibrant woman he remembered, reduced to this struggle for survival. When Leo was born, she said, her voice softening as she spoke his name, a rare moment of tenderness in the grim narrative. Everything changed. He was everything, Mark. My reason for being. My whole world. I knew I had to give him a stable life, a safe place to grow up, even if it wasn't the life I had dreamed of for him. And that's how you ended up here? Mark asked, his voice gentle, gesturing around the small, worn trailer. She nodded, a deep weariness settling on her features. It was the only thing I could afford. Barely. Ray. He offered me a place when no one else would. It's not much, but it's ours. It's a roof over our heads. It's better than being on the streets. But Ray, that man, he's making your life hell, Mark said, the anger returning as he thought of the way Ray had threatened her, the way he clearly preyed on her vulnerability. He is, she admitted, her voice low, filled with a quiet dread. He takes advantage. He knows I can't just pick up and leave easily. Finding a place, paying first and last month's rent, deposits, it's impossible for me right now. I live hand to mouth, Mark. Every dollar goes towards keeping us afloat. And Ray knows it. He uses it against me. Sarah, you don't have to live like this, Mark said, leaning forward, his voice urgent, a fierce determination hardening his resolve. I can help you. I can help you get out of here. You and Leo. Tonight. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief, hope, and profound fear. The offer was generous, life-changing, but the years of hardship and independence had built walls around her heart, making it difficult to accept help, especially from him. Help? Mark, after all this time, after everything that happened, after I kept this from you. I know, he interrupted gently, his voice firm, unwavering. I know we have a lot to talk about, Sarah, a lot to understand, a lot to work through. But right now, that doesn't matter as much as making sure you and Leo are safe, that you have what you need, a safe place to be. He paused, then added, his voice softer, more vulnerable, the words tumbling out, raw and honest. And maybe this is a way for me to make things right, to be the father he deserves, the father I didn't know I was supposed to be. She stared at him, her eyes welling up with tears again, this time not just from sadness and pain, but from a fragile flicker of hope, a glimmer of light in the darkness that had surrounded her for so long. The offer was real. He was here. He saw them. He wanted to help. Are you sure, Mark? She whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You would do that? For us. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, he said, reaching out and gently taking her hand again. Her skin was rough, calloused, a testament to the hard labor and difficult life she had been living. Her hand was small and fragile in his, but he could feel the strength beneath the surface. She squeezed his hand, a small, shaky, but undeniably real smile finally appearing on her face, a shadow of the radiant smile he remembered. "Thank you, Mark. Thank you. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," he said, his mind already racing, planning, strategizing. "We need to be careful, Sarah. We can't just pack up and leave in broad daylight, especially with Ray around." "He usually isn't around much in the evenings," Sarah said, her voice gaining a hint of strength, a spark of determination flickering in her eyes. "He goes out to a bar in town. He's usually gone by sundown." "Okay," Mark said, a plan starting to form. "We'll wait until dark. Pack only what's absolutely essential. We'll need to be quick and quiet. As soon as it's dark enough, we go." He felt a surge of purpose, a sense of finally being able to do something, to act, to make a difference in their lives. The past 5 years have been a blur of regret and unanswered questions, a passive waiting for something that never came. Now, the questions were answered, but the situation was far more dangerous and complicated than he could have ever imagined. He had found Sarah and his son, but they were not simply down on their luck. They were in peril. "Mark," Sarah said, her voice low, pulling him back from his thoughts of escape and planning. Her gaze darted towards the front door again, the fear returning to her eyes, intensifying, becoming something more than just fear of Ray. "There's something else. Something you need to know. Why I've been trying to hide. Who I've been trying to hide from." His body tensed, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. This was it, the deeper layer of the mystery, the source of the true peril. The thrilling, captivating, and terrifying truth promised by the title. "Hide for what, Sarah? Who are you running from?" Her gaze fixed on him, her green eyes wide with a genuine, bone-deep terror that sent a chill down his spine. "Ray isn't the only problem, Mark. He's just part of it. He's involved in things. Things I don't want Leo to be anywhere near. Dangerous things." "Involved in what kind of things?" he pressed, his voice low and urgent. "Trouble, Mark. Real trouble. He deals with people. People who are involved in illegal activities. Drugs, stolen goods, things like that." She lowered her voice even further, leaning closer, as if afraid of being overheard. "He has friends. People who come around. They're not good people. Not the kind you want to cross." This added a new layer to Ray's menace. He wasn't just a petty bully. He was connected, involved in the criminal underworld. But why was Sarah so afraid specifically? Was Ray directly threatening her because she knew something? And then, she continued, her voice trembling, "There was someone else. Someone I was with for a while after you left. He was bad news, Mark. Really bad news." She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor again. Leo's father. He thinks he's someone else's child." Mark stared at her, his mind reeling, struggling to keep up with the influx of information, the sudden, jarring contradictions. Someone else? But Leo had his smile, his features. The resemblance was undeniable. Was she saying that after all this, after the shock and the pain and the dawning realization, that he wasn't Leo's biological father? But how was that possible? The child was a spitting image of him. "What are you talking about, Sarah?" he asked, his voice tight, a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Leo is my son. I know he is. I can see it." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face now, silent and fast. "He's your son, Mark. He is. But there was someone else. And he thinks Leo is his." He waited, his heart pounding, urging her to explain, to make sense of this impossible contradiction. She took a deep, shaky breath, gathering her strength, the story pouring out of her, a torrent of pain, fear, and desperate choices. After everything with you," she began again, her voice raw with emotion, "I was lost, Mark. Devastated. I made some bad choices. I was vulnerable. And I got involved with someone who wasn't good for me. At all. His name was Vinny. Vinny." The name sounded rough, unpleasant, a stark contrast to the softness of Sarah. He was charming at first, Sarah continued, her voice flat, recounting a familiar, tragic story. He seemed to understand me. He was exciting, a little bit dangerous, and I was looking for anything to distract me from the pain. She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, a look of regret flashing across her face. But he was controlling, possessive. His temper was unpredictable, and he was involved in the same kind of things as Ray. Maybe worse. Mark listened intently, the pieces of the puzzle slowly beginning to fall into place, forming a picture far more disturbing than he had anticipated. When I found out I was pregnant, she said, her voice trembling, I knew I had to get away from him. Fast. I couldn't bring a child into that world. I knew he would never be a father to Leo. He didn't want responsibility. He only cared about himself. So you left him? Yes, she said, nodding, her gaze distant. But he didn't want me to leave. He saw me as his property, and I was terrified of what he might do if I just disappeared, especially if he knew I was pregnant. This was where the story twisted, where the impossible contradiction arose. But if he didn't want the child, Mark asked, his brow furrowed in confusion, why would you be hiding from him? Why would he think Leo is his? That's the thing, Mark, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, her eyes wide with the fear that still haunted her. I told him the child was his before I left. It was a lie, Mark. A terrible, desperate lie. She took another shaky breath, the memory clearly painful. I thought if he believed the baby was his, he would leave me alone. I thought he wouldn't want the responsibility, that he would just wash his hands of me, of us. It was the only way I could think of to get him to let me go without coming after me. Mark stared at her, stunned by the desperate gamble she had taken, the dangerous lie she had told. She had lied to a violent, dangerous man, telling him his child was his when the child was actually Mark's. This explained everything, the hiding, the fear, her presence in this desolate place. She wasn't just running from poverty. She was running from a potentially violent ex who believed he had a claim on a child that wasn't his, a child he might see as leverage or worse. So, Vinny thinks Leo is his son. She nodded, tears still flowing silently down her cheeks. Yes, and I'm terrified he'll find me. If he does, I don't know what he'll do. He's dangerous, Mark. He has a temper. He can be cruel, and he has connections. People who can find you, no matter where you go. This was the thrilling, terrifying heart of the story. Sarah wasn't just down on her luck. She was in hiding from a dangerous man, a man who believed he was the father of her child. And that child was Mark's son. The stakes had just escalated exponentially. And Ray? Mark asked, the connection becoming clearer. Is he connected to Vinny? Is that why he's so confident here? Sarah hesitated, her gaze shifting away again, a clear sign of reluctance to share the full truth. Not directly connected, no. But Ray knows people. He's involved in that world. He knows who to talk to. If Vinny started looking for me in this area, asking around, Ray might know I'm here. He might even sell me out. The chilling implication hung in the air. Ray wasn't just a bullying landlord. He was a potential informant, a weak link in Sarah's precarious hiding place, a direct threat who could reveal her location to the dangerous man she was running from. This elevated Ray from a petty annoyance to a genuine threat to their safety. Sarah, you and Leo need to get out of here, Mark said, his voice urgent, leaving no room for argument. Now, tonight, this isn't safe. Any of it. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of desperation and overwhelming uncertainty. Where would we go, Mark? I have nothing. Literally nothing. No money, no place to stay, no plan. The years of hardship and fear were evident in her voice, in her posture. You can come with me, he said immediately, without a second thought, the words a firm anchor in the swirling chaos. I have a house. It's not in the city, it's quiet, out in the country. It's safe. You and Leo can stay there. For as long as you need. Until we figure things out. She stared at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice, by the ease with which he offered everything. The years of independence, the ingrained habit of relying only on herself, made it difficult for her to accept such a generous offer. especially from him, after all that had happened. Mark, I can't ask you to do that. After everything, after I kept Leo from you, it's too much. You're not asking, he said firmly, gently cutting off her protests. I'm offering. Because he's my son, Sarah, and you're the mother of my child. I can't leave you here like this, not knowing what you're running from, not knowing you're in danger. He paused, then added, his voice softer, more vulnerable, and maybe this is a chance. A chance for us. A chance for me to be a father to him. A chance for us to figure things out. Whatever that looks like. He saw the tears welling up in her eyes again, this time mixed with a fragile hope that dared to bloom in the harsh landscape of her life. The possibility of safety, of a future free from fear, of a father for her son, was almost too much to bear. She squeezed his hand, a small, shaking nod her only response. Are you sure, Mark? She whispered again, as if still needing to hear it, to believe it. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, he said, his gaze fixed on hers, willing her to see the truth in his eyes, the depth of his resolve. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Mark, for everything. We need to be careful, he said, his mind already working on the logistics of their escape. We can't just pack up and leave in broad daylight, especially with Ray around. He'll notice. He'll ask questions. He usually isn't around much in the evenings, Sarah said, her voice gaining a hint of strength, a spark of determination rekindled by the possibility of escape. He goes to a bar in town. He's usually gone by sundown and doesn't get back until late. Okay, Mark said, a plan solidifying in his mind. We'll wait until dark. Pack only what's essential. Anything valuable that's small and easy to carry. We'll need to be quick and quiet. As soon as it's dark enough, we go. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a sense of urgency that sharpened his focus. This wasn't just about getting away from a bad landlord. It was about escaping a potential threat, a man who could find them, a man who believed Leo was his. He spent the next few hours in the small trailer, helping Sarah quietly pack their meager belongings. It was a heartbreaking task, seeing how little they owned, how worn their possessions were. A few changes of clothes for each of them, some of Leo's favorite toys and books, a few personal items, photographs, a small jewelry box, a worn diary. Each item told a story of a life lived simply, often sparingly, a life marked by hardship, but also by a fierce love between a mother and her son. Leo, initially shy and reserved, began to warm up to Mark as they spent time together. His curiosity about this new person, this man his mother seemed to know from a long time ago, slowly overcame his caution. He watched Mark with wide, inquisitive eyes, asking hesitant questions about his truck, about where they were going. Mark answered patiently, gently, his heart swelling with a quiet awe as he interacted with the boy who was undeniably his son. He saw so much of himself in Leo. Not just the smile, but the way he tilted his head when he was thinking, the way he frowned in concentration when trying to stack his blocks, the way he giggled at a silly face. It was surreal, breathtakingly so, a connection that felt both entirely new and profoundly, deeply familiar. As dusk settled over Sun Haven, casting long, eerie shadows across the trailer park, a tense silence fell over the small trailer. Their bags were packed, sitting by the door ready. The air inside was thick with anticipation and anxiety. Mark checked his watch. Almost 9 o'clock. The sky outside was a deep, bruised purple, the first stars starting to appear. Ray should be gone by now. Ready, Mark whispered to Sarah, his voice low, a quiet intensity in his tone. She nodded, her face pale but set with a quiet resolve. She held Leo's hand tightly, her knuckles white. Leo, sensing the tension, was quiet, his eyes wide and a little frightened. They crept out of the trailer, the cool night air a welcome contrast to the stuffiness inside. The park was dark, most trailers showing only faint glows from within, like sleepy eyes watching them. They walked quickly and silently down the narrow, muddy path, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth. Every creak of gravel underfoot, every rustle of leaves in the overgrown bushes sounded amplified in the stillness of the night, making Mark jumpy, his senses on high alert. He kept glancing around, half expecting to see a figure emerge from the shadows, to hear a voice challenging them. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, anxious drumbeat, fueled by a potent mix of fear and adrenaline. He had to get them out of here. He had to keep them safe. They reached Mark's truck, parked near the entrance, its dark shape a familiar and comforting sight in the gloom. Mark quickly opened the passenger door for Sarah and Leo, urging them to get in. Sarah settled Leo in the seat, buckling him in quickly, her movements efficient and practiced. Mark hurried around to the driver's side, his hand reaching for the door handle. Just as he was about to get in, a voice cut through the quiet night, sharp and unwelcome. "Hold it right there." Mark froze, his hand on the door handle. Ray. He was standing near the entrance of the park, leaning against a battered, dark-colored car, a cigarette glowing like an angry eye in the semi-darkness. And he wasn't alone. Another man, larger and more menacing than Ray, stood beside him, his arms crossed over his massive chest, a silent, imposing presence. Sarah gasped from inside the truck, pulling Leo closer to her, her small hand covering his ear as if to shield him from the sound of the voice. "Going somewhere, Sarah?" Ray asked, his voice laced with suspicion and a clear, predatory amusement. He straightened up, pushing himself off the car, his eyes glinting in the faint light. "Just going out for some air, Ray," Sarah said, trying to sound casual, her voice trembling despite her efforts. She knew it was a flimsy lie, but she couldn't think of anything else. Ray laughed, a short, harsh, unpleasant sound that grated on Mark's nerves. "Out for some air with packed bags? Don't play dumb with me, Sarah. I saw you earlier." And I saw him. His eyes narrowed, fixing on Mark. "And bringing your city friend along for a little midnight drive?" Mark stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Ray and the truck, his body a protective barrier. "Leave her alone, Ray. We're leaving." "Oh, a protector now, are we?" Ray sneered, taking a step closer, his posture aggressive. "You think you could just waltz in here and take what's mine? Take my tenant, who owes me money." "She's not yours, Ray," Mark said, his voice low and firm, a quiet defiance in his tone. "And the money was paid. Everything in this park is mine." Ray snarled, his voice rising, his face contorting in anger. The larger man beside him straightened up further, his stance threatening, a silent warning. "And I say you ain't leaving. Not like this." He nodded at the other man. "Get their bags. Check the truck." The larger man started to move towards the truck, his footsteps heavy on the gravel. Mark knew he couldn't let that happen. Their few belongings were all Sarah and Leo had in the world. More importantly, he couldn't let them be stopped. Ray would keep them here, or worse, he might contact Vinny. He acted on instinct, fueled by a surge of adrenaline and a fierce determination to protect Sarah and Leo. He lunged forward, shoving Ray hard in the chest with both hands. Ray stumbled back, surprised by the sudden attack, dropping his cigarette, cursing loudly. The other man paused, momentarily stunned by the unexpected aggression. "Get in the truck, Sarah. Go. Drive," Mark yelled, his voice raw with urgency, turning back towards the truck, waving his arm towards the exit. Sarah didn't hesitate. She scrambled into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys Mark had left in the ignition. She quickly started the truck's engine. It roared to life, a loud, defiant sound that shattered the stillness of the night. She put it in gear, her hands shaking, and the truck lurched forward, tires spinning slightly on the damp gravel before finding purchase, speeding towards the exit of the park. Ray recovered quickly, his face contorted in a furious rage. He saw the truck pulling away, saw them escaping. "Stop them, you idiot," he roared at his accomplice. But it was too late. The truck was already pulling out onto the main road, its taillights disappearing into the darkness. Mark watched them go, a wave of profound relief washing over him, so strong it almost buckled his knees, immediately followed by a sharp, throbbing pain in his jaw from the blow he knew was coming. He had bought them time. That was all that mattered. Ray and his friend turned their attention back to Mark, their faces menacing, eyes glinting with anger and the promise of retribution. Mark knew he was in for it. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't built for this kind of confrontation, but he stood his ground, bracing himself. He had gotten Sarah and Leo to safety, at least for now. He would face the consequences. You think you can just do that? Ray growled, advancing on him, his fists clenched. You think you can just waltz in here, hit me, and take what's mine? You got another thing coming, pretty boy. The larger man came at Mark first, a silent, powerful force. Mark managed to dodge the initial swing, but the second connected with his ribs, sending a searing pain through his side and knocking the wind out of him. He stumbled back, gasping for air. Ray joined the fray, coming at Mark from the side, his movements quicker and dirtier than his accomplices. He aimed a punch at Mark's head, and this time, Mark wasn't fast enough. The blow landed squarely on his jaw, sending a shockwave of pain through his skull. He staggered back further, his head ringing, tasting the coppery tang of blood in his mouth. It was 2 against 1, and Mark knew he couldn't win a stand-up fight. He was outmatched, outmuscled, in an unfamiliar territory. Just as the larger man raised his fist again, preparing to deliver another blow, headlights swept across the park entrance. Another car was pulling in, its beams cutting through the darkness, illuminating the scene. Ray and his accomplice towering over a clearly outmatched Mark, who was hunched over, trying to catch his breath. Ray and his friend froze, their heads snapping towards the incoming vehicle. The sudden intrusion, the unexpected appearance of another car, created a split second of distraction. The car stopped near them. The driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out. It was a woman, tall and imposing, her silhouette sharp and defined against the bright headlights of her car. She was dressed in dark, expensive-looking clothes, her posture straight and confident. "Ray," she said, her voice cool and authoritative, cutting through the tense silence like a whip. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, a command. Ray and his friend froze completely. Ray's angry, menacing expression faltered, replaced by a look of nervous deference, almost fear. His shoulders slumped slightly, and he took a step back from Mark, the fight draining out of him instantly. "Eleanor," Ray said, his voice suddenly much less confident, almost subservient. He visibly swallowed, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Eleanor ignored him, her gaze sweeping past him, assessing the scene with sharp, intelligent eyes. Her gaze lingered on Mark for a moment, taking in his bruised face and shaken state, before shifting towards the direction the truck had just gone, towards the main road. She seemed to take in the whole picture in a single, encompassing glance. The 2 men, the battered Mark, the fleeing truck. "What was going on here, Ray?" Eleanor asked, her voice calm, but with an undeniable edge of command, a quiet authority that brooked no argument. Ray stammered, trying to explain himself, his usual bluster completely gone. "Just someone was leaving without paying, Eleanor. Trying to skip out. My tenant." Eleanor raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, a gesture that spoke volumes, conveying disbelief and irritation without a single word. "Without paying what? Exactly, Ray?" Ray shifted uncomfortably under her scrutinizing gaze. "Rent and some overdue fees." And he gestured towards Mark, his voice regaining a hint of his earlier anger. "He attacked me when I tried to stop her." Eleanor stepped closer, her gaze fixed on Ray, her expression unreadable. "Ray, we talked about this. I don't want trouble here, especially not the kind of trouble that attracts unwanted attention." She glanced pointedly at Mark, then back towards the empty road where the truck had vanished. The implication was clear. Eleanor was involved in things she didn't want exposed, and Ray's heavy-handed, public altercations could draw the wrong kind of eyes to the park and to her operations. "He put his hands on me, Eleanor." Ray protested again, gesturing wildly at Mark. Eleanor considered Mark for a long moment, her eyes sharp and assessing, probing, as if trying to read his intentions, his history. "Did he?" she asked, her tone skeptical, clearly not taking Ray's word at face value. "Or were you trying to prevent someone from leaving? Someone who didn't want to stay?" Ray didn't answer, just scowled, his face sullen. His accomplice remained silent, a hulking, impassive presence beside him. Eleanor turned her full attention to Mark. Her gaze was intense, penetrating. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice direct. My name is Mark, he said, still trying to catch his breath, his jaw throbbing. I'm a friend of Sarah's. I was helping her leave. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. A flicker of something Mark couldn't identify. Recognition? Suspicion? In their depths. Sarah left with you? Yes, Mark confirmed, standing a little straighter despite the pain. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, considering, processing the information. She seemed to be calculating, weighing options, assessing the potential repercussions of this unexpected development. Sarah has been a source of complications, she said finally, her voice thoughtful, almost detached, as if discussing a business problem. Complications? What did this woman, this Eleanor, have to do with Sarah? She clearly held power here, power over Ray, power over the trailer park. Was she connected to the dangerous life Sarah was trying to escape? Where are you taking her? Eleanor asked, her gaze sharp, demanding an answer. Mark hesitated. He didn't know who this woman was, if she was a friend, an enemy, or something in between. She had stopped Ray, but her demeanor was cold, calculating. He couldn't risk revealing Sarah and Leo's destination. Somewhere safe, he said evasively, keeping his voice steady. Eleanor nodded slowly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corners of her lips. It wasn't a warm smile. That would be wise. She looked back at Ray, her expression hardening again. Ray, forget about it. Let them go. It's not worth the trouble. Ray looked stunned, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. But the money, consider it a loss, Eleanor said dismissively, waving a hand as if brushing away an annoying fly. This isn't worth the hassle. I don't want this kind of mess on my property. She gave Ray a look that clearly indicated the conversation was over, a silent thread in her eyes. Ray grumbled under his breath, but didn't argue further. He knew better than to cross Eleanor. Eleanor then turned back to Mark, her expression unreadable. Sarah mentioned some difficulties she was having. She said, her voice lower now, almost conversational, but with an underlying intensity. With a man from her past. An ex-boyfriend. Vinny. Eleanor knew about Vinny. The connection, however indirect, was there. Yes, Mark said cautiously, his guard still up. She's trying to get away from him. He's dangerous. Eleanor was silent again, her gaze distant, fixed on a point beyond the dark trees surrounding the park. Some pasts are harder to escape than others, she said, her voice low, almost to herself, a chillingly knowing statement. She then looked directly at Mark, her eyes holding a strange intensity, a depth that suggested she knew more than she was letting on, perhaps understood the nature of the man Sarah was running from. If he comes looking for her, and he likely will, he won't stop. He's persistent, and he has resources. This woman knew more than she was letting on. She seemed to know about Vinny, about his nature, about the threat he posed. Who was she? What was her connection to this world, to the kind of people Ray and Vinny were involved with? Who are you? Mark asked again, more directly this time, needing to understand. Eleanor gave that faint, unreadable smile again. Let's just say I have an interest in keeping things quiet and tidy. Unwanted attention is bad for business. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the dilapidated trailer park, then back to Mark. Sarah's situation was becoming messy. It was attracting the wrong kind of attention. Her words were cryptic, but the implication was clear. Eleanor was involved in something that required discretion and a lack of official scrutiny. Ray's antics and Sarah's precarious situation, especially if it drew the attention of someone like Vinny who might bring his own kind of trouble, were a liability. Eleanor had intervened not out of kindness, but to protect her own interests, to ensure the quiet, undisturbed operation of whatever she was involved in. It made a strange, unsettling kind of sense in the twisted logic of this hidden world. You should get going, Eleanor said, her tone shifting back to businesslike, the brief moment of cryptic revelation ending. Put some distance between you and this place. And be careful. He is persistent, and he doesn't like to lose. Mark nodded, still trying to piece together all the information he had just received. He didn't understand Eleanor's full role, her connection to this world of danger and hidden activities. But she had intervened, stopped Ray, and seemed to know about the man Sarah was running from. He needed to get Sarah and Leo to safety. That was the absolute priority. He glanced back towards the dark maze of trailers, a deep sense of unease lingering in the pit of his stomach. Sun Haven was more than just a rundown trailer park. It was a place with its own rules, its own dangers, and its own shadowy figures like Ray and Eleanor. "Thank you," Mark said to Eleanor, unsure what else to say. He didn't know if he should trust her, but she had helped them, however self-interested her motives might have been. Eleanor simply nodded, a cool, enigmatic look in her eyes. "Drive safe." She turned and got back into her car, a sleek, dark vehicle that looked out of place in the trailer park. She didn't drive away immediately. Instead, she sat there, watching as Mark, bruised and shaken but resolute, walked back to his battered pickup truck. He got into the driver's seat, his body aching, his jaw throbbing. He looked over at Sarah and Leo. Leo had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms, exhausted by the fear and the late hour, his small head resting on her shoulder, his thumb in his mouth. Sarah was looking out the window, her face pale and drawn, her expression pensive, a mixture of relief and lingering fear in her eyes. She turned to him as if sensing his gaze, a silent question in her eyes. "Are you okay, Mark?" she asked softly, her hand gently reaching out to touch his arm, her touch a comforting anchor. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "A little bruised, but okay. Are you two all right?" "We're fine, Mark," she said, her voice filled with a profound relief that resonated in the small cab of the truck. "We're safe. Thanks to you." "Who was that woman?" he asked again, needing to understand, needing to piece together the puzzle of Sun Haven. "Eleanor." Sarah hesitated, a flicker of that unreadable emotion in her eyes again. "She's complicated, Mark. She owns the park. And other things. Other things." Sarah sighed a long, weary sound. "She's involved in various businesses. Some are legitimate, others less so. She's powerful around here. She likes to keep a low profile, avoid trouble with the authorities. She doesn't like anything that draws attention." This confirmed Mark's suspicions. Eleanor was connected to the criminal element, operating in the shadows, and she viewed anything that threatened that operation as a problem. Ray's bullying and Sarah's situation were just inconveniences she needed to manage to protect her own interests. "Does she know about Vinny?" Mark asked, the name a cold knot in his stomach. Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "She knows I was having trouble with an ex, someone dangerous." She didn't ask for details, but she made it clear that she doesn't want that kind of trouble on her property. She wants anything related to him, or anyone like him, gone. So Eleanor wasn't necessarily protecting Sarah out of the goodness of her heart, but rather because Sarah's past, embodied by Vinny, posed a threat to Eleanor's own operations. It was a chilling realization, highlighting the pragmatic, self-serving nature of power in this hidden world. But for now, it had worked in their favor. Eleanor's intervention had given them the chance to escape. "We need to figure out our next steps," Mark said, his mind racing, planning for the future, the uncertain, potentially dangerous future that lay ahead. "Where can we go that's safe? Where Vinny won't find you? Where he won't even think to look?" "I don't know, Mark," Sarah said, her voice small and weary, the weight of years of fear and hiding evident in her tone. "He has ways of finding people. He's persistent, and he has people who work for him. We'll figure it out," Mark said, his voice determined, unwavering. He wasn't going to let Vinny, or anyone else, hurt them. He had just found his son, the son he never knew he had, and he wasn't going to lose him, or Sarah, again. This was his fight now. He was their protector. He started the truck's engine, the sound loud in the quiet night. He put it in gear and slowly drove out of the trailer park, leaving the shadows of Sun Haven behind. As he drove onto the main road, he glanced in his rearview mirror. Eleanor's dark car was still parked there, its headlights illuminating the entrance to the park, a silent sentinel in the darkness. She was watching him go. He focused on the road ahead, the events of the last few hours replaying in his mind like a disjointed, terrifying film. Finding Sarah, the shock of seeing Leo smile, the unbelievable revelation that he was a father, the grim reality of Sarah's life in the trailer park, the menacing presence of Ray, the chilling truth about Vinny and the dangerous lie Sarah had told, and the mysterious, unsettling appearance of Eleanor. It was a whirlwind of emotions, revelations, and sudden, undeniable danger. He glanced over at Sarah and Leo again. Leo was still sleeping peacefully, his small chest rising and falling with each breath, a beacon of innocence in the darkness. Sarah was watching him, her face soft with love and relief. He felt a profound shift within him. 5 years ago, he had left Sarah, hurt and angry, his heart broken by a misunderstanding he hadn't known how to fix. He had built a life based on avoiding emotional entanglement, on keeping himself safe from pain. Now, he had found her again, and with her he had found his son, a living, breathing piece of himself he had never known was missing. And with them, he had found a danger he hadn't anticipated, a thrilling, terrifying reality that demanded he step up, that forced him out of his emotional shell. His life, which had felt stagnant and empty for so long, was suddenly filled with purpose, with risk, and with a love he hadn't realized he was missing until he saw his own smile on the face of a child. Protecting them, keeping them safe from the shadows of the past, from the dangers of the present, was his new mission. The road ahead was long and uncertain. They were running from a dangerous past, heading towards an unknown future, toward a new life they would have to build together, piece by difficult piece. But for the first time in a long time, Mark didn't feel lost. He had a direction, a purpose, and a family, however unconventional, to fight for. The trailer park was behind them, a chapter closed, a nightmare left in the shadows. But the story was far from over. The thrilling, captivating, and dangerous journey of building a new life together, of becoming a family in the face of overwhelming odds, had just begun. And so, they drove on through the night, leaving the secrets and shadows of Sun Haven Trailer Park behind, heading towards the promise and the peril of a new dawn together. Thank you for listening to After 5 Years Apart. He finds her living in a trailer park, with a son who shares his smile. This journey through secrets, danger, and unexpected connections is a testament to the complicated threads that weave our lives together. If you were captivated by Mark's discovery, Sarah's struggle, and the thrilling path they must now navigate, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing you compelling stories that keep you on the edge of your seat and touch your heart. Thank you again for joining us on this adventure.